Beneath the soil of Central America, under the roots of ceiba trees and the stones of forgotten temples, ancient voices still whisper. They speak of places that were never marked on maps, places said to lie beneath the world of the living. To the civilizations of Mesoamerica, death was not an ending. It was a passage, a journey through vast, unseen kingdoms where gods and spirits ruled beyond time. The Aztecs called it Mictlan, the land of the dead. The Maya named it Xibalba, the place of fear. And long before either rose, the Zapotecs, Mixtecs, and Olmecs imagined their own realms of dusk and rebirth, silent cities beneath the mountains, where ancestors walked among shadows and light. According to legend, these underworlds were not places of punishment or paradise. They were reflections, mirrors of the earth above, woven with the same forests, rivers, and winds, yet touched by a deeper stillness. To die was to begin again, to travel the long road downward, carrying one's breath and name across worlds. Even now, in the heart of Mexico and Guatemala, people still place candles and food for their dead, still whisper prayers toward the ground, because somewhere deep inside the collective memory of this land, there remains a belief that the border between life and death is not a wall, but a doorway, and every soul must, sooner or later, step through it. When the Spanish chroniclers first heard these tales, they were bewildered. They tried to translate Mictlan as hell, but it was not that. The underworld of the Aztecs was not a place of flames, but of journeys, rivers to cross, mountains to climb, winds that stripped away the last traces of earthly life. It was a landscape of purification, not torment. In the Maya world, the afterlife was even more intricate. Xibalba was ruled by powerful lords with names that echoed through fear and reverence, the lords of death, of disease, of darkness. But even they, in some versions, were not villains. They were guardians of balance, reminding humanity that every sunrise must follow night, and every seed must die before it grows. There's a reason these myths survived centuries of conquest, fire, and silence, because beneath their imagery of bones and shadows lies a question we all still carry. What happens to us when we die? The Mesoamerican answer was not despair, it was transformation. To them, death fed life. Blood fed the sun. Sacrifice renewed the stars. And the underworld was not below, it was within. Archaeologists have found traces of these beliefs carved into stone and painted onto ceramics. Caves in the Yucatan still bear signs of ritual offerings, jade beads, obsidian blades, shells from distant seas, all left as gifts for unseen gods. The Maya saw caves as sacred mouths of the earth, entrances to Xibalba itself. When they lit torches inside, the flickering light on limestone walls must have looked like spirits dancing, echoes of ancestors moving through eternal twilight. Imagine standing in one of those caverns, the air heavy with moisture, the sound of dripping water echoing like slow, deliberate heartbeats. To the ancients, this was not emptiness, it was presence, a space alive with divinity. According to some versions of the Aztec creation story, even the gods themselves had to descend into the underworld to bring life back to the world above. The god Quetzalcoatl, the Feathered Serpent, once journeyed down to Mictlan to retrieve the bones of previous generations, the bones of humanity. There he faced trials, deceptions, and death itself. But he returned with those sacred remains, mixed them with his own blood, and from that fusion, humankind was born anew. It's a story that turns fear into creation, a myth that says, life is born from death, and each descent into darkness is, somewhere in its depths, a return to light. When we talk about Mesoamerican underworlds, we are not merely talking about myth. We're talking about a worldview, a way of seeing existence as a circle, not a line. Everything returns. Every soul, every sun, every rainstorm. Today, when you walk through the markets of Oaxaca or across cemeteries during Dia de los Muertos, you can still feel that ancient rhythm. Marigold petals guide the dead home. Candles line the path. Sugar skulls smile, not in mockery of death, but in recognition of its place in the cycle. It's not superstition. It's memory. A cultural echo of the belief that the world of the dead is not somewhere else. It's here, layered beneath our feet, folded into the pulse of every living thing. And so our descent begins. We'll follow the roads that lead below mountains and into myth, where gods trade secrets with mortals, where rivers shine like obsidian, and where death, far from an ending, becomes the oldest form of rebirth. For thousands of years, people looked not up to the heavens for answers, but down into the earth. They believed the underworld held the truth of who we are, and where we go when breath leaves the body. In the chapters to come, we'll wander those shadowed realms, Mictlan, Xibalba, and the countless forgotten worlds that lived between myth and stone. We'll trace the paths of gods who fell, heroes who returned, and souls who walked the long road home. Because in these stories of descent and return lies a secret that transcends culture, religion, and time. The idea that death was never meant to frighten us, but to remind us how sacred it is to live. Long before the Spanish ships touched the coasts of the Americas, the lands that would one day be called Mesoamerica pulsed with civilizations older than memory. From the high valleys of central Mexico to the rain-soaked jungles of Yucatan, from the cloud forests of Chiapas to the volcanic plains of El Salvador, people lived in worlds shaped by both earth and spirit. They did not divide the sacred from the natural. To them, every mountain, river, and star was alive. This was a geography of extremes. Jagged volcanoes breathed smoke into the sky. Rivers cut deep veins through the land, feeding jungles that hummed with unseen life. In the west, the Pacific shimmered like molten glass. In the east, the Caribbean Sea stretched endlessly, blue as obsidian in sunlight. Between them lay the heartlands, Teotihuacan, Monte Alban, Tikal, Palenque, cities that rose like stone constellations, built to mirror the heavens. But beneath those heavens, beneath the layers of stone and soil, people imagined another world. They believed that the universe was structured in layers, heavens above, earth in the middle, and the underworld below. Each layer was connected by sacred trees, mountains, and caves, the axis mundi, the world's spine. For the Maya, this axis was the ceiba tree, its roots reaching into Xibalba, its branches stretching toward the stars. For the Aztecs, it was the great mountain Copec, where gods fought, died, and were reborn. These weren't metaphors to them. They were the architecture of existence. Life unfolded across dimensions, and every being, human, animal, divine, moved through them in cycles of transformation. The world was not static. It breathed. It turned. It renewed itself endlessly through fire, water, and blood. When dawn rose over Tenochtitlan, the Aztecs believed the sun itself had survived its own journey through the underworld to rise again. They saw each sunrise as a victory, not a guarantee, the result of divine struggle, the continuation of cosmic order. If the sun could die and return, so could man, and so could the earth itself. That's why death in these lands was never the end. It was a necessary motion, one that mirrored the rhythm of the world. Corn, their most sacred crop, taught this lesson. Buried seeds sprouted into life, only to be harvested and buried again. So too, the human spirit was planted in the soil of Mictlan or Xibalba, to grow again in another form. Archaeological sites across Mesoamerica reveal this cosmology not just in text, but in design. In the Temple of the Inscriptions at Palenque, the tomb of King Paco lies beneath 9 carved levels, representing the 9 layers of the Maya underworld. Above him rises a temple that points to the heavens, forming a perfect vertical journey between life, death, and eternity. In the caves beneath Teotihuacan, archaeologists found tunnels lined with pyrite, fool's gold that sparkled like stars. To the ancients, these were not decorations. They were symbols of the night sky reflected underground, proof that the underworld mirrored the cosmos above. Even in everyday life, this layered understanding of existence shaped behavior. People offered food and drink to the dead not out of superstition, but because they believed the worlds were interconnected, that nourishment could cross boundaries. When a loved one died, family spoke softly near the earth, guiding the spirit's path with songs and offerings of maize, water, and copal incense. Smoke rising from those rituals was seen as a bridge, a shimmering thread between worlds. The Mesoamerican underworlds were not realms of demons, but of continuity. They explained earthquakes and droughts, dreams and illness, memory and ancestry. When volcanoes erupted, people said the underworld was stirring. When rain fell, they believed the gods of the deep had opened the gates between realms. Each culture had its own geography of the soul. For the Zapotecs, the afterlife lay in a misty valley ruled by the god Coquibezaleo, the lord of the dead, who welcomed ancestors with maize and pulque. For the Mixtecs, caves and tombs were portals, places where rulers communed with the divine. And for the Maya, the underworld was a vast labyrinth of rivers, beasts, and challenges, each symbolizing the trials a soul must overcome to be reborn in light. But across all these variations, one truth remained. Death and life were not enemies. They were partners, eternally entwined. Every offering, every sacrifice, every ritual of descent echoed that harmony. It's easy, from a modern lens, to see these beliefs as grim or fatalistic. But if you stand in those lands at dusk, when the air grows heavy and the jungle hums, you can feel why they saw no boundary between above and below. The same rain that nourished the living also fell upon the graves of the dead. The same fire that cooked food for the living burned incense for the departed. The same moon that guided hunters watched over spirits crossing the river of night. In this world, life was never solitary. It was shared with gods, with ancestors, with the countless unseen beings that occupied the spaces between worlds. And that awareness shaped everything, from their art to their architecture, from the stories they told their children to the way they faced their own mortality. To understand Mictlan or Xibalba, we must first understand the people who imagined them, a civilization that lived not in fear of death, but in dialogue with it. Their world was a bridge suspended between light and shadow, between the breath of the living and the whisper of those who came before. And beneath that bridge waited the realms of the underworld, intricate, perilous, and beautiful. Realms that promised not punishment, but passage. Not despair, but transformation. Because for the people of Mesoamerica, to go down was not to fall. It was to return. No one knows when humanity first began to imagine a world beyond death. But in Mesoamerica, those visions reach further back than writing itself. Before the rise of the Aztecs or the Maya, before pyramids pierced the clouds, there were the Olmecs, the mysterious mother culture of the region. They lived along the swampy coasts of Veracruz and Tabasco more than 3,000 years ago, carving colossal heads from basalt and leaving behind symbols whose meanings are still debated. Though their language remains undeciphered, their art whispers of something profound. Human faces emerging from jaguar mouths, serpents slithering through caves, rulers wearing the headdresses of gods who moved between worlds. These were not random images. They were early expressions of belief. That power flowed from the earth below, from the dark, fertile, and sacred realm that gave birth to all things. Archaeologists studying Olmec sites like La Venta and San Lorenzo have found evidence of ritual pits filled with jade, mirrors, and figurines buried deep beneath temple floors. To the Olmecs, burial was not about concealment. It was about connection. By placing offerings underground, they were feeding the living veins of the earth, maintaining the balance between the human and the divine. Many scholars see in these acts the seeds of what would later become the elaborate journeys through Mictlan and Xibalba, the conviction that descent was part of the cosmic order. Centuries later, as cultures evolved and languages diversified, these early ideas took new shapes. The Zapotecs of Monte Alban built tombs beneath their cities, carved with intricate hieroglyphs of ancestors seated on thrones, not lying in eternal sleep, but ruling from within the soil. The dead were not gone. They were advisors, protectors, and sometimes even judges of the living. By the time the Maya rose to power, the underworld had become a place of story, vivid, structured, filled with gods, monsters, and meaning. In the sacred Maya text known as the Popol Vuh, preserved through oral tradition and later written in the Kitsch language, the origins of Xibalba are told like an epic. It speaks of two sets of hero twins, divine brothers who descended into the underworld to face the lords of death. There, they encountered trials of fire, darkness, and deceit. They were tricked, killed, and dismembered, and then, astonishingly, reborn as the sun and the moon. This tale, though mythic, carries the essence of Mesoamerican cosmology. That death is not an annihilation, but a transformation. That every descent is preparation for ascent. and that even the gods themselves are bound by this rhythm of loss and renewal. The story of the hero twins was more than entertainment. It was a cosmic allegory. Through their journey, the Maya explained the daily path of the sun across the sky, its disappearance into the underworld each night, and its triumphant return at dawn. They also explained the agricultural cycle, maize dying in the earth to rise again in harvest. Everything mirrored everything. Life above was a reflection of life below. Further north, among the Nahuatl-speaking peoples who would later form the Aztec Empire, these ideas evolved again. In their mythic history, the gods themselves descended into Mictlan, the underworld, to shape humanity. The story tells that after the previous age of the world was destroyed, Quetzalcoatl, the Feathered Serpent, god of wind and knowledge, descended into Mictlan to retrieve the bones of those who had lived before. The Lord of the Dead, Mictlantecuhtli, allowed it only under one condition, that Quetzalcoatl not drop the bones. But on his way back, the god stumbled, and the bones shattered. He gathered them up again, mixed them with his own blood, and from that sacred union, humankind was reborn, fragile, imperfect, but alive. That imperfection was not a flaw in their worldview. It was the point. Humanity was made from fragments of what came before, from death itself. To live was to carry within you the dust of past worlds, the echoes of ancestors. You were not alone. You were continuity embodied. Oral traditions across Mesoamerica preserved these ideas long before they were written. Storytellers and priests, known among the Aztecs as Tlamatanim, those who know, passed myths from generation to generation beside temple fires. Their words were woven with song and ritual, and each retelling adapted to the times. One city might imagine Xibalba as a labyrinth of water, another as a forest of bones. But the essence never changed: descent, trial, transformation. Even the Spanish friars, who arrived centuries later to record what they saw, were astonished by how consistent these beliefs were among distant peoples who had never met. From the highlands of Guatemala to the coasts of Veracruz, from Oaxaca to Yucatan, they found the same motifs: rivers to cross, mountains to climb, dogs as guides for the dead, and rulers who returned from the underworld to prove their divine right. It was as if the whole region shared a spiritual map of the cosmos. Modern anthropologists believe this shared structure came from both trade and migration. But perhaps it was something deeper, a shared recognition of nature's rhythms. In these lands of volcanic soil and seasonal rain, the people saw how life sprouted, died, and returned. They didn't need to look to the stars for proof of rebirth. They saw it every time maize rose from the ground. When the Maya buried their kings, they wrapped them in cloth, placed jade beads in their mouths, and aligned tomb entrances towards sacred caves or the rising sun, gestures that echoed the mythic journey of the soul through Xibalba. The Olmec practice of burying mirrors and serpentine figures beneath altars had evolved into elaborate rituals of passage. The underworld had become not just belief, but architecture, a lived reality mirrored in how they built their cities and buried their dead. Every pyramid, every temple platform, was a microcosm of the cosmos. The top reached the heavens, the middle supported life, and below, through secret chambers or caves, one entered the underworld. These weren't symbolic spaces. They were literal stages for ritual reenactments of the myths that governed existence. The earliest Mesoamerican myths of the afterlife weren't meant to frighten. They were meant to prepare. They offered guidance for a journey everyone would one day take, the path from breath to silence and beyond. In those myths, courage mattered more than purity. Endurance mattered more than obedience. And even the gods had to earn their way through darkness to reach the light. The people of Mesoamerica did not invent these stories to explain death. They built them to understand life, its fragility, its beauty, its endless return. Every underworld needs its rulers. Every journey into darkness has its gatekeepers, its guardians, its judges. And in the great mythic traditions of Mesoamerica, those rulers were not simple monsters or devils. They were forces of balance, embodiments of time, decay, and transformation. They were necessary. Among the Aztecs, the supreme lord of the underworld was Mictlantecuhtli, the skeletal god whose name means Lord of Mictlan. He was often depicted with a skull for a face, his ribs exposed, his eyes wide and empty as obsidian. He wore necklaces made of human eyeballs and teeth, not as trophies, but as symbols of what returns to the earth. His consort was Mictlan, the Lady of the Dead, who ruled by his side and received the souls of the departed. Together, they were not feared so much as respected, custodians of the final realm, ensuring the great cosmic cycle continued without interruption. To meet them was not punishment, it was passage. According to Aztec belief, every soul, unless it died in battle, childbirth, or sacrifice, would make its way to Mictlan. The journey took 4 years, crossing 9 levels of trials, rivers of blood, mountains that crashed together, icy winds that cut to the bone. Each challenge stripped the traveler of what tied them to the living world, name, flesh, memory, until only the essence remained. And when that final essence reached Mictlan and Mictlan, they welcomed it into eternal rest. Their domain was not fiery nor cold. It was neutral, a twilight kingdom of stillness, where souls finally found balance. For a civilization that valued symmetry and duality, this made perfect sense. Mictlan was not hell. It was equilibrium. In the Maya world, the picture was different, more elaborate, more personal, and far more dangerous. Their underworld, Xibalba, was a living labyrinth ruled by the lords of death. According to the Popol Vuh, these lords were many, each with a title reflecting a form of human suffering. There was one death and 7 death, who ruled them all. There was House of Cold, House of Jaguars, House of Darkness, and House of Bats, each representing trials the soul must face. Other lords were named for disease, decay, or humiliation, beings that personified the physical and emotional pain of life. But even in their terror, they served a function. They tested the courage of the soul. They stripped away pride and illusion, until what remained could rise into light. To the Maya, even suffering had purpose. It refined the spirit, preparing it for rebirth. The hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, were the central figures of that lesson. Born from the bones of their father, who had himself been defeated in Xibalba, they were destined to avenge him, not through vengeance, but through wisdom. Their story reads like a mythic descent into both death and self-knowledge. When the lords of Xibalba summoned them, the twins accepted, knowing the journey meant death. They faced endless trials, a house filled with razors that danced through the air, a room of total darkness, a chamber where icy winds froze flesh and bone. They were tricked, mocked, and finally executed, their bodies ground into dust and cast into the river. But from that dust, they were reborn, one as the sun, the other as the moon. The myth captures something profoundly human, that even the greatest loss may carry the seed of renewal. The twins' triumph over the lords of death did not destroy Xibalba, it balanced it. From that point on, life and death were bound in cosmic rhythm. Day followed night, harvest followed decay, rebirth followed burial. The Maya saw this pattern everywhere. They painted it on pottery, carved it into stele, and recorded it in the glyphs of the Dresden Codex. They even traced it in the stars. The Milky Way was imagined as the great serpent of the underworld, its coils winding across the night sky, a celestial river through which souls traveled. Further south, in the highlands of Oaxaca, the Zapotecs told of Coquibezaleo, their own lord of the dead, a figure with a skull face, jeweled eyes, and the power to communicate between the worlds. Unlike the fearsome imagery of Mictlan, Coquibezaleo was often portrayed sitting calmly, hands folded, surrounded by offerings of corn and pulque. He was less a god of terror than of continuity, a reminder that the ancestors remained present, guiding the living from the mists. Each of these deities, Mictlan, Mictlan, the lords of Xibalba, Coquibezaleo, reflected not evil, but inevitability. They were the guardians of the necessary. They held the balance between decay and regeneration. Without them, creation itself would unravel. Even the gods who were not lords of the dead often had to descend into their realms. Quetzalcoatl's journey to Mictlan, Hunahpu and Xbalanque's trials in Xibalba. These tales repeat a single archetype, the descent of the divine into darkness, the sacrifice that sustains life. In this sense, Mesoamerican mythology mirrors other ancient systems, like the Greek descent of Orpheus or the Sumerian journey of Inanna. but with one crucial difference. In Mesoamerica, descent was not rebellion. It was duty. The gods did not fall into the underworld because they sinned. They went because it was part of the cycle, because the world needed them to go. Their suffering was a form of service. Their death ensured the rising of the sun, the growth of the crops, the beating of human hearts. To the Aztecs, this idea became ritual. The gods had given their lives to create the world, so humans, in turn, offered theirs in gratitude. But even in this, there was no sense of despair. A warrior who died in battle or a woman who died giving birth was celebrated, for both had reenacted the cosmic sacrifice, entering the realm of the divine. And within all this divine symmetry, one figure stands out: Mictlan, the Lady of the Dead. Her presence still echoes through Mexican culture today. She is the ancient root of La Catrina, the elegant skeletal woman who graces altars during Dia de los Muertos, a symbol of death's dignity, beauty, and equality. Once a goddess who ruled the bones beneath the earth, she has become a reminder that all people, rich or poor, strong or weak, are united in the same return. In the eyes of those who built temples to her name, that unity was sacred. Death did not divide the world, it connected it. To honor the dead was to sustain the living. To remember was to keep the cycle turning. And somewhere deep beneath the mountains of central Mexico, the gods of Mictlan still keep their silent vigil, their realm undisturbed, their purpose unchanged: to welcome the souls who finish their journey through the world of light, and to prepare them for whatever waits beyond the darkness. According to Aztec cosmology, when a person died, their soul did not simply vanish, it began a journey. A long, perilous, sacred passage through 9 levels of the underworld known as Mictlan, the land of the dead. It was not punishment, nor reward. It was the road every ordinary human being had to walk, the path back to balance. The journey could take 4 years. During that time, the soul would shed every attachment to the world above, name, memories, emotions, even its face. Only when nothing remained could it finally rest in the still heart of Mictlan. When a person died, their family began the preparations for this voyage. They wrapped the body in cloth, placed a small jade bead in the mouth, a symbol of breath, the essence of life. Beside the corpse they laid food, water, and a precious companion, a yellow dog, sometimes painted or carved from clay. In life, dogs guarded homes. In death, they guided souls. According to belief, only a dog could lead its master safely across the first obstacle, the great river that divided the world of the living from the dead. That river was called Apanohuea. The first level of Mictlan was a wide, misty expanse where the soul faced the waters of the afterlife. If one had been kind to dogs during life, a spirit dog waited there, its first shining gold. It would let the soul climb on its back and carry it across the current. But if one had mistreated dogs, the animal would turn away, leaving the soul to wander along the shore, unable to pass. Compassion, not power, was the first key to the underworld. The second level was Tepetl, the place where mountains clash. Here, 2 colossal peaks moved endlessly toward and away from each other, grinding like the jaws of the earth. The soul had to time its passage perfectly, slipping through the narrow space between them without being crushed. This was a trial of courage and awareness, a reminder that even in death, one must move with the rhythm of the world. The third level, Ixtapetl, was the mountain of obsidian knives. Its slopes were sharp as glass, slicing through the ghostly travelers who dared to climb. Yet the pain was not punishment. It stripped away the residue of earthly desire, cutting the bonds that tied the soul to what it once possessed. By the time one reached the summit, the burdens of greed, envy, and vanity had fallen away like dust. The fourth level was Itzahekian, the place of freezing winds. Blizzards howled across barren plains, filled with knives of ice. Here the soul faced loneliness and regret, the cold breath of everything left undone. Those who carried heavy hearts might linger there, frozen in memory. Only by acceptance could they move on. Next came the fifth level, Paniakatakoyan, the place where people fly and turn like flags. Wind stronger than hurricanes whipped through the void, tearing at the spirit's form. Each gust peeled away another layer of identity until nothing remained but the essence of being. To the Aztecs, this was purification, the soul made weightless by surrender. The sixth level, to Mimimaloyan, was a place where invisible hands hurled spears at passing souls. Every wound recalled the pains of life, betrayal, loss, sickness, failure. But these attacks were not vengeance, they were memory itself, piercing one last time before dissolving. Each soul had to endure, not fight, for resistance only prolonged the journey. Then came Teokoyowehualoyan, the place where one's heart is eaten by a jaguar. This was perhaps the most mysterious stage. A massive jaguar, the symbol of night and power, awaited each traveler. When it devoured the soul's heart, it did not destroy it. It consumed the last spark of ego, returning it to the cosmic cycle. In Maya and Aztec belief alike, the jaguar was the guardian of the sun's path through darkness. To be devoured by it was to join that eternal motion. The eighth level was as Mictlan Apocalalka, the place of smoke and mirrors. Here the soul encountered visions, reflections of its own life, shifting and flickering like firelight. Some saw loved ones, others saw mistakes, triumphs, or forgotten moments. It was said that Mictlantecuhtli himself appeared in these illusions, silent, watching. The soul had to walk through without turning back, for to cling to the images was to be trapped forever in them. This was the trial of detachment, letting go, even of the beautiful. Finally, after 4 years and 9 trials, the traveler reached the 9th and final level, Chikinamictlan, the place of the dead's rest. Here the soul stood before Mictlantecuhtli and Mictecacituatl. There was no judgment, no scales or punishment, only stillness, the kind of stillness that follows the end of a song. The gods welcomed the soul, offered rest, and allowed it to dissolve into the great unity of existence. To the Aztecs, this was not annihilation but completion. The soul became part of the cosmic rhythm that sustained the universe. It joined the earth, the water, the fire, and the wind, the same forces that had once shaped its mortal body. The cycle was whole. When we think of Mictlan, we imagine a dark and terrible place. But in truth, it was a masterpiece of meaning, a map of the human condition. Each level represented a truth about life: compassion, courage, loss, surrender, transformation. It was not the descent of sinners, but the education of the soul. Even in modern Mexico, echoes of this belief remain. During Dia de los Muertos, families still build altars with candles, water, salt, and flowers. These offerings guide the spirits through their journey, reminders of the ancient path through Mictlan. Every marigold petal laid upon a grave is, in essence, a light along that road. Some archaeologists believe the 9 levels of Mictlan were mirrored in Aztec temples, with stairways symbolizing the soul's descent and ascent. Others see them reflected in the patterns of the stars, especially the 9 underworlds represented in the movements of Venus, a celestial twin of Quetzalcoatl, the god who once walked that same path. No one can say for certain where the idea came from, whether it was born of observation, or of the deep intuition that all things move through cycles. But it endured, even after the fall of Tenochtitlan, when the empire's temples were burned and its priests silenced. The myth of Mictlan remained in whispers and rituals, carried by generations who still looked to the earth and believed it was alive. Perhaps that's why Mictlan was never forgotten, because it offered not fear, but hope. The promise that no matter how far we fall into darkness, there is always another side. And as the last ember of life fades, the journey begins again. Down the river of the dog, between the mountains that breathe, through the winds and the jaguar's mouth, towards silence, balance, and peace. If Mictlan was a realm of silence and stillness, the Maya underworld, Xibalba, was its mirror opposite, alive, cunning, and full of sound. Here, the dead did not fade into quiet eternity. They walked through a labyrinth of traps and illusions, where gods laughed at mortals, and every step tested the truth of one's heart. The Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Quiche Maya, tells that Xibalba was ruled by the lords of death, beings of enormous power and cruel humor. They did not destroy life out of hatred. They played with it, as if testing how much darkness the human spirit could endure before it remembered light. Among them were one Death and seven Death, the twin rulers of the realm, Scab Stripper and Blood Gatherer, who spread disease, Pus Master and Jaundice Master, who caused sickness, Bone Scepter, Skull Scepter, and Flying Scab, who oversaw the tortures of the flesh. Their world was not fire and brimstone. It was mockery, deception, and fear. But Xibalba was not a single place. It was a network, a vast, shifting realm beneath the earth, accessible through caves, cenotes, and rivers. The Maya believed these openings were real gates into the other world, and many remain today. Deep limestone caverns hidden beneath the jungles of Belize, Guatemala, and the Yucatan. Even now, local villagers call some of them mouths of Xibalba. Inside, archaeologists have found offerings, obsidian blades, clay bowls, jade pendants, left there to feed the spirits of the deep. According to the Popol Vuh, long before the present world, the lords of death grew restless. They loved the sound of games and laughter from the earth above, but they could not stand to hear it without joining in. So when two young brothers, Hunahpu and Vucub Hunahpu, played ball near the edge of the underworld, the lords grew jealous. They summoned them to Xibalba to play in their court, deep beneath the ground. The brothers went, proud, skilled, but unaware that the invitation was a trap. There in the shadows, they were humiliated, tricked, and ultimately killed. Their severed heads were hung in a tree, which miraculously began to bear fruit, gourds that looked like skulls. One day, a young woman named Exquick, daughter of one of the lords of death, approached the tree. When she reached out, the skull of Hunahpu spoke to her. It spat into her hand, and from that divine act, she conceived twin sons, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, the hero twins. They were born in the world of the living, raised by their grandmother, and destined to finish the story their father had begun. When they grew up, they too played the sacred ball game, a sport that represented the movement of the sun and moon across the sky. Once again, the echoes of the game reached the lords of death, and once again, those dark gods demanded the players come to Xibalba. But these twins were not like their father. They knew the stories, the tricks, the illusions. They accepted the summons, not out of arrogance, but out of destiny. Their descent began at the edge of the earth, where rivers flowed with scorpions and blood. They crossed them all, guided by wit and courage. When they arrived before the lords, they were shown two thrones and told to sit. But the seats were burning stones, the first of many traps. The twins, wary, refused. Their restraint impressed even the gods. Next came the trials of the houses, chambers designed to break the spirit. The house of darkness, where no light existed. The house of cold, where winds froze flesh and bone. The house of jaguars, filled with beasts whose eyes glowed like coals. The house of bats, where giant creatures screeched in eternal night. And finally, the house of blades, where sharp obsidian stones moved like living things. Each test was meant to kill them. Each time, the twins outwitted the lords, using fireflies for light, huddling together for warmth, tricking beasts with decoys and song. But the last trial took them by surprise. In the house of bats, Hunahpu peered from his hiding place to see if dawn had come. In that instant, Kamasats, the bat god, swooped down and decapitated him. His brother, Xbalanque, hid the body, placing a squash in place of Hunahpu's head, so their enemies wouldn't notice. When they next played ball, the lords demanded to see the severed head. The twins agreed, but in a moment of brilliance, Xbalanque summoned birds to steal the head back and restore it to his brother. The lords grew furious. They called for a final test, one that would end the game forever. They ordered the twins to leap into a great fire pit, claiming it was part of the ritual. The twins agreed. They jumped into the flames and were consumed. The lords of death rejoiced. At last, they believed, the game was over. But 3 days later, the ashes in the pit began to move. Out of them rose two new beings, dancers, dressed as magicians. They entertained the lords of death with impossible feats, burning houses that rebuilt themselves, cutting their own bodies apart, and rising whole again. The lords, delighted, begged them to perform the same trick, to kill them and bring them back to life. The dancers agreed. But when they sacrificed the lords, they did not resurrect them. The rulers of Xibalba were dead, and their power broken. Only then did the dancers reveal their true identities. Hunahpu and Xbalanque reborn. They ascended from the underworld as light itself, one becoming the sun, the other the moon. Their father's head, once hung in a tree, rose into the heavens as Venus, the morning star. And Xibalba, once a kingdom of arrogance and deceit, fell into shadow, its power fading with the dawn. To the Maya, this was not only a story of triumph, it was the blueprint of existence. Every night, the sun descended into the underworld to face the lords of death, and every morning it returned. Every seed fell into the soil, and every harvest rose again. Every life ended, and every new child carried the spark of rebirth. Even death itself was not absolute. It was the other side of creation. The tale of the hero twins spread across centuries, carved into temple walls, and painted on the vases of kings. It became both myth and philosophy, an explanation of the natural order, where darkness and light are eternal partners. The Maya did not need to conquer death, they only needed to understand it, because in understanding, they found peace. And perhaps that is why, even now, when the sun disappears behind the jungle canopy and the stars shimmer like scattered jade, people still say that the hero twins are watching, playing their eternal game across the heavens, keeping the rhythm of life and death alive. Every civilization tells its stories through symbols, but few did so as profoundly as the peoples of ancient Mesoamerica. To them, myth was not simply a collection of tales. It was a code of the universe, written in the language of nature itself. Every number, every animal, every plant, every color had a purpose, echoing through art, ritual, and architecture. The myths of Mictlan and Xibalba were not meant to be read, they were meant to be lived. The first and most sacred symbol was the ceiba tree, the Axch, the world tree. Its enormous trunk could grow to pierce the sky, its roots diving deep into the underworld. The Maya saw it as the axis mundi, the spine of the universe, connecting all realms. When a soul died, it was believed to descend along those roots into Xibalba. When reborn, it climbed back up through the branches into the light. The ceiba's broad, smooth bark and enormous canopy were so striking that even today, people across Central America call it the tree that holds up the heavens. Animals, too, carried sacred messages. The jaguar was perhaps the most powerful, a creature of night, strength, and silence. For the Maya, the jaguar was not feared, it was revered. It represented the passage between life and death, because only the jaguar could move unseen through both the forest of day and the jungle of night. Priests and kings often took on jaguar names and masks, believing they inherited its power to travel between worlds. The spotted pelt symbolized the stars scattered across the black sky, proof that even darkness contains light. In Aztec belief, the jaguar held similar weight. It was the guardian of the sun during its nightly descent through Mictlan. When the jaguar roared, people said it was the sun crying from the underworld. To be devoured by the jaguar, in ritual or myth, was not a curse. It was an honor, a return to the great circle. The dog, as in the first level of Mictlan, was another sacred being. In life, it protected homes. In death, it guided souls. Clay dog figurines, Xoloitzcuintlas, have been found in countless tombs, especially in western Mexico. They were often placed beside the deceased, mouths open as if mid-bark, forever ready to lead their masters across the river of the dead. Even now, the Xoloitzcuintli, or Xolo, remains a national symbol of Mexico, a living link to an ancient belief that loyalty transcends death. Among birds, the quetzal reigned supreme. Its emerald feathers symbolized breath, spirit, and freedom. In life, no one could own a quetzal. Killing it was forbidden. Its feathers could be plucked, but the bird was always released. This respect mirrored the Mesoamerican idea that life is sacred only when it continues. Nothing may truly belong to us forever. Then there were the numbers. To the Maya and the Aztecs, numbers were divine, the rhythm of the cosmos made visible. 9 represented the levels of Mictlan, the layers of the underworld. 13 represented the heavens. Together, they made 22, the sacred count of completeness. The Maya calendar, one of the most precise in the ancient world, was built upon such relationships. Each day carried its own energy, its nawal, an essence that influenced the events of life and the steps of the soul. To be born under a certain day was to inherit its spirit, just as the gods themselves were bound to the cosmic rhythm of time. The color red symbolized blood, not death, but life. It was the color of sunrise, of sacrifice, of renewal. To the Aztecs, blood was the divine energy that fueled the sun, and to shed it, in ritual or battle, was to participate in creation. Black represented the underworld, not as evil, but as mystery. White symbolized bones and purity, the foundation of rebirth. Yellow was maize, the sacred substance of humanity. And blue, deep and endless, was the realm of water, sky, and spirit. Even directions had meaning. The Aztecs and Maya both aligned their cities and temples according to the 4 cardinal points, each associated with color, element, and deity. East was red and belonged to the rising sun. North was black, the realm of death. West was white, where the sun descended. South was blue or yellow, the direction of renewal and maize. At the center of it all stood the Xibalba, the bridge between all worlds. But perhaps the most pervasive symbol of all was the skull. For the Aztecs and Maya alike, skulls were not symbols of terror, they were emblems of continuity. The skull meant that life endures through transformation. When archaeologists uncovered the Great Tzompantli, or Skull Wreck, in the ruins of Tenochtitlan, they found not a monument to death, but to life's renewal, each skull representing a spirit that had fed the sun and kept the universe alive. This ancient vision survives today in the smiling sugar skulls of Dia de los Muertos. What the modern world sees as decoration is, in truth, a 2,000-year-old meditation on the beauty of impermanence. The Maya also used bones as calendars, carving glyphs onto femurs and skulls to record time. The belief was simple yet profound. Bones last longer than flesh, and so they carry memory. Even when the body dissolves, the structure remains, a metaphor for the eternal rhythm of death and life. Natural elements carried equal weight. Water was the threshold between worlds. Rivers in Mictlan, cenotes and Xibalba, rained from the sky. It was both life-giver and death-bringer. Fire was transformation, a force that destroyed yet purified, mirroring the hero twins' death and resurrection. Wind was the breath of gods, the invisible messenger between realms. And earth was the womb of it all, dark, nourishing, eternal. To Mesoamerican peoples, symbolism was not artifice. It was the structure of truth. When they carved a jaguar into stone or painted a skull on pottery, they weren't illustrating belief, they were embodying it. Each act of creation was an act of remembrance, keeping the cosmic balance alive. And so, through these symbols, they spoke across centuries, through ritual, through language, through architecture, and even through the way they lived their daily lives. To grind maize, to light a fire, to cross a river, all could be sacred if done with awareness of the cycle. In Mesoamerica, the universe was not distant, it was intimate. The gods did not live apart from humanity. They breathed through every element of the natural world. And when the people told their stories, of Mictlan, of Xibalba, of journeys and rebirths, they were not speaking of somewhere else. They were speaking of here, of the space beneath the surface, beneath the skin, beneath the self. Because in the end, their symbols remind us of a truth modern minds often forget. The underworld is not a place we go to after death. It is a dimension we carry inside us, a mirror of everything we fear, love, and hope to understand. Even after centuries of conquest, conversion, and silence, the underworld of Mesoamerica never disappeared. It changed its face, hid behind new names, and learned to speak through new rituals, but it never truly died. Today, its echoes still breathe through songs, altars, and festivals across Mexico, Guatemala, and beyond. The ancient languages may have faded, but the rhythm of their belief still moves through the living. Nowhere is this more visible than in Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead. Each year, at the turn of autumn, when the air cools and marigolds bloom, families prepare altars for their departed loved ones. They cover them with candles, sugar skulls, and photographs, with tamales, pan de muerto, and cups of hot chocolate. To outsiders, it may look like a celebration of death, but to those who understand, it is a celebration of continuity, the same idea that animated Mictlan and Xibalba. The dead are not gone. They have simply crossed the river and wait, patiently, for one night to return. The marigold, or simpasicle, holds special power. Its bright orange petals symbolize the light of the sun and the warmth of life. Families scatter them along paths leading to graves, believing their scent and color guide souls back from the underworld. The custom may seem Christianized today, tied to All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, but its heart is pre-Columbian. It echoes the ancient offerings of maize and flowers that the Mexica, Zapotecs, and Maya once placed at the mouths of caves, the entrances to the underworld. Every candle lit on those altars is a torch from Xibalba's trials. Every bowl of food is an echo of the meals once offered to the souls journeying through Mictlan. Every prayer whispered into the night is a conversation with the same gods, only now cloaked in the imagery of saints and angels. Across Latin America, death remains close, not as a shadow, but as a companion. In Guatemala, families hold vigils in cemeteries, painting tombs in bright blues, greens, and pinks, turning graveyards into cities of color. In Oaxaca, the streets fill with music and laughter, skeletons dancing in parades, not as horror, but as joy. In Michoacan, fishermen light candles on Lake Pátzcuaro, and the flicker of those flames across the water recalls the first level of Mictlan, the River of Souls. Even in the Andean highlands, far from Maya and Aztec lands, people still leave offerings of food, coca leaves, and flowers for ancestors. The forms have changed, but the essence remains the same, a bridge between the living and the dead, built of memory and love. In language, too, the echoes persist. Many Nahuatl words survive in everyday Spanish: Mictlan, simpasicle, copal. They remind speakers, often unconsciously, of a worldview where every breath, every flame, every grain of maize has spirit. Even the way many Latin American families speak of their dead, not in the past tense, but as present, is part of that inheritance. The dead are never gone. They are simply on the other side. Modern Mexican art continues this dialogue. The painter Diego Rivera filled his murals with skeletons, dancers, and Aztec deities, images that fused Catholic and indigenous cosmologies. Frida Kahlo painted her own face beside skulls and marigolds, exploring suffering and rebirth as inseparable twins. Even Jose Guadalupe Posada's iconic creation, La Catrina, the elegant skeletal lady in a wide hat, was born from Mictecacituatl, the Lady of Mictlan. What began as satire became symbol, the universal reminder that beneath our masks, we are all the same. In literature and film, the ancient underworld has found new voices. Movies like Coco or Book of Life may seem like children's tales, but they are retellings of the old myth, journeys through Mictlan disguised as family stories. They carry forward the same message, that love survives death, and memory keeps souls alive. Each generation rewrites the myth in its own way, but the structure never changes: descent, trial, return. Even in the ruins themselves, the conversation continues. At Palenque, Uxmal, Chichen Itza, and Monte Alban, archaeologists and local guides describe the temples not as relics, but as living beings. They say that when it rains, the stones breathe. When the wind passes through the carvings, the ancestors are whispering. Tourists may hear folklore, but to those who live near these sacred places, the underworld is still part of daily reality. And in the cenotes, the sinkholes of the Yucatan, divers sometimes find offerings deep below: pottery, jade, even human bones, preserved by the water. The locals explain it simply: they were sent below with respect. Each cenote is an eye of Xibalba, and the people still treat it as such, never entering without asking permission, never swimming without offering a few drops of water back to the earth. The continuity between ancient and modern belief is more than tradition, it's identity. For millions of people across Mexico and Central America, remembering the dead is not nostalgia, it is survival. It keeps the bond between past and present intact, reminding them that their roots run as deep as the ceiba trees. Even outside Latin America, the influence has spread. Museums display the colorful art of Dia de los Muertos around the world. Tattoo artists etch sugar skulls onto skin as symbols of resilience. Musicians write songs about the beauty of death, turning fear into gratitude. The myth has crossed oceans, not through conquest, but through fascination. Because the Mesoamerican view of death offers something the modern world desperately craves: peace with impermanence. In a society that fears endings, these traditions whisper an older truth: that every ending is only one part of a larger rhythm, that the dead are not lost, and that to honor them is to honor life itself. And so, every year, when marigold petals scatter in the wind and candles flicker in the dark, it is not merely remembrance that takes place. It is ritual, the same ancient ritual that once opened the gates of Mictlan and Xibalba, a promise renewed between the worlds, that we will meet again, that love never dies, and that the underworld, far from being beneath us, is woven into every heartbeat, every tear, every breath. To modern minds, the worlds of Mictlan and Xibalba might sound like pure imagination, colorful myths from a distant time. But when archaeology, anthropology, and psychology began to look deeper, a new understanding emerged. These weren't just stories about the dead. They were maps of the human mind, the natural world, and the very structure of belief. When archaeologists entered the limestone caves of the Yucatan and Chiapas, they discovered something extraordinary. Deep inside, far beyond where sunlight could reach, they found altars, pottery, and offerings carefully arranged as if for invisible guests. Some chambers even contained skeletal remains positioned deliberately, surrounded by jade, obsidian, and shells brought from coasts hundreds of miles away. These were not burial sites in the modern sense. They were ritual portals. To the ancient Maya, a cave was not just a hole in the ground. It was a living wound in the body of the earth, an entrance to the underworld. Modern researchers, armed with carbon dating and LiDAR mapping, have traced networks of these sacred caves beneath major Maya cities. Under Uxmal, Copan, and Tikal, tunnels twist like veins beneath temples. Some lead to underground rivers, others end abruptly in chambers filled with soot, incense, and offerings. It's as if the cities were built not only to reach the heavens, but to anchor them into the depths. The underworld wasn't metaphor, it was infrastructure. Anthropologists noticed something else. This vertical worldview, heaven, earth, underworld, appears in nearly every human culture. From the Sumerian Kur to the Greek Hades, from the Norse Helheim to the Egyptian Duat, humanity has always imagined a realm beneath the surface. Why? Because death, for all its mystery, is not abstract. It happens here, in the ground. Bodies return to the soil. Seeds germinate from decay. The earth devours and creates. For agricultural civilizations like those of Mesoamerica, the soil was sacred, both grave and womb. To bury something was not to lose it, but to begin its transformation. Psychology offers another layer of insight. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychoanalyst who studied myths across cultures, wrote that the descent into the underworld symbolizes the journey of the unconscious. The dark, hidden part of the psyche mirrors the shadowy landscapes of Mictlan and Xibalba. In dreams and legends alike, to descend is to confront the self, to meet fear, pain, and memory, and to rise again changed. When the Maya told of the hero twins facing the lords of death, they were not only telling a cosmological story. They were describing an internal process, the confrontation with darkness necessary for rebirth. Modern neuroscience, too, finds resonance in these old beliefs. When people experience near-death states or profound meditation, their brains sometimes produce vivid imagery, tunnels, rivers, radiant beings, feelings of descent and release. These experiences appear across cultures, suggesting that the mythic structure of the afterlife may be embedded in the way human consciousness processes transition. The mind, faced with the unknown, imagines passage. It builds a story, a road, a guide, a light, to make sense of the silence beyond. Anthropologists studying funerary customs in Mesoamerica noticed that the emotional pattern is universal: guidance, offering, and continuity. The dog guiding the soul across the river in Mictlan is the same instinct that led ancient Egyptians to bury boats with their pharaohs or Vikings to send their dead to sea. The marigold path of Dia de los Muertos is the same impulse that places candles on graves across Europe and Asia. Everywhere, humans light the way for their dead, because hope itself demands a path. But the scientific perspective doesn't erase the mystery. If anything, it deepens it. Archaeology can describe what the Maya did in caves, but not what they felt when they lit those torches in the dark. Anthropology can trace how the idea of the underworld spread, but not why it comforts us to imagine our ancestors just a breath away. And psychology can decode symbols, but not replace the awe they evoke. Perhaps that's why, even in a world of satellites and quantum physics, these myths endure. They give structure to what cannot be measured: grief, memory, and meaning. Science explains the how, myth explains the why. They are not enemies. They are two halves of the same vision, like the twin sons of the hero twins. For the people of Mesoamerica, this harmony was never in question. Their astronomers were priests, their mathematicians were poets. They read the heavens and the earth with the same reverence, seeing pattern everywhere. When a volcano erupted, they saw not chaos but communication, the underworld exhaling. When the rains failed, they did not curse the gods. They negotiated, offered, remembered. The dialogue between worlds was constant. And even now, through science, we are beginning to rediscover that dialogue, to see the living planet not as inert matter, but as a system of connection, pulse, and breath. Every culture creates its own vocabulary for the same experience, that life and death are partners, not rivals. The Mesoamericans expressed it through Mictlan and Xibalba. We might call it ecology, or energy, or the cycle of matter. But at its core, it is the same truth. Nothing is ever truly lost. In recent decades, neuroscientists studying memory have discovered that the human brain keeps traces of our ancestors, not metaphorically, but literally, through genetic markers and inherited stress responses. In other words, we carry the past in our biology. We are, quite literally, haunted, not by ghosts, but by continuity. And that continuity is precisely what the ancients intuited when they lit candles for their dead and spoke to them as if they were still there. They were. So when modern science studies the psychology of grief, the anthropology of death rituals, or the biology of decay, it is still walking, unknowingly, along the same old road through Mictlan, seeking meaning in the dark, searching for the pattern that connects endings to beginnings. And perhaps that is the greatest revelation of all, that the underworld is not beneath us, but within us, a landscape of memory, emotion, and transformation we cross again and again throughout life. Each loss, each change, each rebirth is another passage through those ancient gates. Mictlan and Xibalba may have begun as myths carved into stone, but their truth has outlasted the temples that bore them. Because science can measure light, but myth teaches us how to see in darkness. When night falls over the jungles of Central America, the air changes. The trees breathe. The cicadas pulse in the dark. And if you stand quietly near the mouth of a cave, one of those ancient entrances the Maya once called the gates of Xibalba, you might feel it, that sense of presence, as if something still stirs below. Not ghosts, not gods, but memory. The deep memory of a world that never stopped believing that death and life walk the same path. For thousands of years, these lands have carried that truth. The Olmecs, the Zapotecs, the Maya, the Mexica, all different peoples, yet all telling the same story in different tongues. That to die is to change form. That to descend is to renew. That darkness is not the end of light, but its beginning. When we look back at Mictlan and Xibalba, we're not only studying religion or folklore. We're reading the psychological blueprint of a civilization that dared to look death in the eye and saw, not despair, but design. The idea that every ending is a seed, that suffering refines, that memory sustains, that even the sun must pass through shadow before it rises again. Modern culture often speaks of progress, of leaving the past behind. But perhaps the people of Mesoamerica understood something we've forgotten. That progress without remembrance is amnesia, and that the soil that feeds tomorrow is made of yesterday's remains. Their temples, aligned to the stars, were also aligned to the underworld. Every step upward mirrored a descent within. Every festival for the dead was a lesson in gratitude for the living. Maybe that's why their myths still move us, because beneath their masks of gods and monsters, they speak to the same truths we face every day. Love and loss, courage and fear, transformation and return. We still cross rivers of sorrow, climb mountains of trial, and search for light after nights of darkness. The old stories remind us that these are not random struggles. They are sacred passages, each one preparing us for the next. The Mesoamericans never drew a line between body and spirit, or between earth and sky. They saw all life as one breathing organism, endlessly cycling. When they offered maize to the dead, they weren't appealing to superstition. They were acknowledging participation in that great exchange, giving back what they had taken, so the rhythm could continue. And perhaps that's why their cultures, though conquered in body, were never erased in spirit. Their rituals, colors, and songs endured because they spoke to something universal, that the human heart is not afraid of endings, only of forgetting their meaning. Today, as we face our own forms of darkness, the loss of loved ones, the decline of nature, the anxieties of an uncertain future, these ancient underworlds feel closer than ever. They invite us to see death not as an intrusion, but as a teacher, to find peace not in denial, but in participation, in the cycle that binds us all. In the myth of the hero twins, death was a trickster, not a tyrant. The twins didn't fight it with swords, but with wit, patience, and understanding. They entered willingly, learned its rules, and emerged transformed, as the sun and the moon. That story isn't about gods. It's about us. It's about learning to descend into what frightens us, loss, change, the unknown, and to rise again with new eyes. The Aztec soul walking through Mictlan endured 9 trials, each stripping away illusion until only essence remained. Isn't that what life does to us? Each experience takes something, youth, certainty, possessions, until only truth is left. And in that final stillness, what remains is not emptiness, but connection. The same balance Mictlan guarded at the heart of his kingdom. When you see candles flickering on an altar, or marigold petals scattered across a grave, you're not just witnessing tradition. You're witnessing one of humanity's oldest forms of wisdom. That remembrance is resurrection. That love defies decay. That the underworld is not below us, but beneath every heartbeat that dares to keep loving after loss. In that sense, Mictlan and Xibalba were never about death. They were about continuance. They taught that the soul, like the sun, like the seed, must disappear to be reborn, and that every journey through darkness carries within it the promise of dawn. Science can describe how stars die and reform, how matter transforms and recycles, how the atoms in our bodies once belonged to ancient trees, oceans, even other lives. The Mesoamericans already knew this, not in equations, but in myth. They lived by it. They danced, prayed, and built civilizations upon it. So when we listen to these legends today, of gods descending into Mictlan, of twins defeating the lords of death, of jaguars guarding the sun, we are not hearing superstition. We are hearing a philosophy written in ritual, a poetry carved into stone, a truth older than any religion, that there is no true death, only transformation. And perhaps, if we listen long enough, we might begin to feel what they felt, that the world itself is a living being, breathing through its mountains, dreaming through its rivers, and remembering through us. That we, too, are part of the underworld story, not its prisoners, but its inheritors. Because every time we fall and rise again, every time we mourn and love once more, every time we look into the dark and see light waiting there, we are walking the ancient road, the road through Mictlan and Xibalba, the road beneath the world, the road that leads home. And perhaps that is the oldest myth of all, that in descending into darkness, humanity discovered how to shine.